Since 1972, the McIlvaney Financial Group has been a conservative, contrarian investment firm. With that mindset, they have created a multifaceted approach to portfolio management, offering a wide array of services including hedging through precious metals, wealth advising, a unique short fund, and an excellent educational resources. We have had David McIlvaney on our show multiple times because we respect his outlook, viewpoints, and recommendations. You really need to take advantage of the free portfolio risk analysis and bank safety ratings they're offering our listeners. Just call them at 1-800-525-9556, and you will be put in touch with an advisor with years of experience who can take 15 minutes and give you a much better understanding of what true portfolio diversification is. Again, call them at 1-800-525-9556 and benefit from their expertise. Hi everyone, this is Jason Burack of Wall Street for Main Street and managing editor of the News Doctors and independent financial journalist Eric Dubin. Welcome back to another Welcome to Dystopia podcast. This is episode number 34. Eric, we have gold almost at 1,300. It's at 1,283 right now, according to Kitco. Silver's at 1,839. Do you think they're on the verge of a breakout?
Well, they were trying to break out, and they're pushing gold and silver away from breakout levels. You know, we've already broken out, technically speaking. The 1,250, 1,200, and mid-60s, those were technical signals that were being responded to by both the cartel as well as people who look at technical signals as their guideposts to either to sell or buy more. And in the last month, we've seen a cycle where gold went up a lot, hit those levels, got beaten down. You know, people fearful of the Federal Reserve and the FOMC cycle of interest rate normalization and all of that, and then boom, we have this geopolitical influence insert itself into the picture, and that helped push us over 1,250 gold on upward to making a run to testing 1,300. And today, guess what? Though we haven't been beaten down very far as we record on the 17th of April, we see gold being taken down. And this is all counterintuitive. I mean, other than the fact that there are monies flowing into the equity market today, and we've had a little bit of a bounce after some congestion and some upside resistance and, S&P 500 universe of standard equities, the movements between different segments of the markets are interesting to watch. And I don't think that we're seeing gold fall down just because people are rushing into stocks. I think we're seeing gold being pressured. We saw miners once again pressured all week. They just were performing horribly as gold was making a run trying to test that 1,300 level. These are the kind of things that happen where cartel, the interests in central banks and governments and their treasuries and ministries of finance and so forth, they all coordinate to try to keep the system together. Saying words like this by the mainstream's eye is indicative of somebody wearing a tinfoil hat, but this is the reality. All of our markets of any substance, the major markets, are all managed. And I do think that we're going to see a lot higher prices in precious metals as this summer approaches. That'll be somewhat counterintuitive, too, because a lot of people look at the summer as summer doldrums and whatnot. There's just too much craziness going on. We have the ongoing black cloud when it comes to the United States government's budget and the political debate that's going to wrap around that, the tax reform. The entire economic agenda of Trump is wrapped into all of that milieu and political fracas that's about to just get crazy. And you add the high valuations in the stock market and the Federal Reserve trying to and will, in fact, at least raise interest rates once more this year, and China's economy rolling over and their credit actually, the amount of global liquidity that came in 2016 on the back of China increasing liquidity in their own domestic economy and having that spill out into the rest of the world was huge. It was like 25% of the global liquidity they put out into the whole economy, world economy in 2016, and that floated financial markets. We're always looking at all these various things that help keep all of our markets of the stock market being supported by that liquidity just mentioned, and stock buybacks over $1 trillion, and we have fictitious markets. We have markets that are supported by fake liquidity that just can't continue. I really do think that we're in the process of rolling over. So, yes, long answer, but 50-plus reasons why fundamentals for precious metals are just over-the-top outstanding. And I think we are in a technical breakout on top of everything else, and all of this bodes well for metals going a lot higher. I think that by the end of this year, we're going to easily be seeing gold, 1,500 plus, and probably a lot higher in 2018. A lot higher in 2018 because we will be rolling over. I think we're going to take out the old highs actually in 2018.
This divergence between the gold and silver miners and the paper metals price, this is something that the bullion banks and the cartel, they can do from time to time. And this prevents the hedge funds, the trend traders who have large pools of capital but aren't loyal to gold and silver, don't really care about the fundamentals, only look at the technicals and the charts. When the miners aren't confirming a breakout in the metals prices, these guys won't put big amounts of capital into either gold and silver trades, whether it's GLD, SLV, actually buying physical metal or buying mining shares. So the cartel is aware of this, and this is one of their tactics that they've done in the past to slow things down. But there's a great article with good technical analysis by hedge fund manager Jesse Felder from a couple days ago called Gold is on the Verge of Greatness. And he's been bearish on gold for a while, but what he's showing is that gold's very close to breaking overhead resistance on its long-term downtrend line. And what that means is gold has tested it a number of times on the long-term downtrend line. But if gold breaks that line, then you're going to see a lot of large pools of capital. So those institutions, those hedge fund managers, those trend traders who don't give a crap about the fundamentals of gold, they would step into the market and buy it even further. So this is something I'm sure, Eric, that the cartel is aware of. Jesse, it's not a long article, but there's good technical analysis on it. The other thing he talks about in the article, which we'll link in the show notes to our listeners, is about the dollar index. So, that has to do with a combination of things with the government shutdown, but also Trump's comments and now his Treasury Secretary's comments on the strength of the U.S. dollar. And he thinks that the dollar is in a major topping process similar to 2002.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And we do see longer-term cycles with the dollar, and we are most likely going to embark on a downtrend. We see constantly the race to the bottom where, executed by currency swaps and all the other kind of coordination that our largest of large central bankers conduct to try to depreciate the purchasing power of major currencies at roughly a constant rate. So as to, in the financial markets, when you look at the currency markets, the relative cross rates between, say, the dollar and the euro are really important and all of that. But if the purchasing power of the actual currencies depreciates at the same time, you don't see the relative valuation shift show up in the exchange rate. So that's kind of the hidden way that we see the pernicious impact of inflation eating away at our buying power, and how the central bankers hide all of these games. But we will see the dollar go down, even relative to other currencies, on a cross rate, on the exchange rate, because, amongst other things, and this is what's really new, the Trump administration is actively pursuing an open policy of trying to have the dollar be devalued vis-a-vis major currencies. And also, even though they tapered their comments about China, and we'll get to that in a moment, with respect to whether or not to declare them a currency manipulator. I mean, a month ago, and further back in time, there was much talk about how Trump was going to flat out call China a currency manipulator, which is not just a statement for political theater, it actually has legal ramifications, and requiring a formal process of some kind of a policy redress on United States policy. So that could have conceivably set in motion a chain event that would have blown up this summer, where China may have said, okay, fine, you declare us currency manipulator, you want to tax us X amount on imports as a retaliation, well, we're just going to go ahead and devalue the renminbi by 15% because we've got to do it anyway, so screw you. And that's what we were looking at as a very high probable scenario in the summer. And this whole situation with North Korea and the theater about tying together the Syrian strike, the missile strike, in the presence of President Xi while they were apparently enjoying chocolate cake in their dessert, according to the ridiculous, over-the-top interview that Trump did with Maria Bartiromo. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, he called Hillary. I didn't see all of it. I only saw highlights. He called Hillary Clinton guilty Hillary Clinton. So I like that part of it at least.
I mean, you talk about sycophantry in journalism. I mean, Maria Bartiromo looked like a fluffer in that thing. She might as well have just jumped to our president's lap. I mean, talk about like fawning over authority and power. I mean, what a disgusting display. And Trump feeds into it too. He's speaking to her like, "Well, you've always been very good to me, Maria." It's like patting her on the head. Good little girl. Anyway, well, where the hell were we?
Well, you were talking about Trump wanting to devalue the dollar, and you know that's not good. Trump wanting a weaker dollar, saying it's too strong, wanting lower interest rates. That's not good for the people on Main Street. That's going to hurt people's savings, going to hurt the purchasing power of their money. Trump's claiming that'll help bring jobs back to the United States. But, Eric, I talked about this in my SGT report interview. You know, all these countries want to devalue their currency, so this is mercantilism.
That's right.
It's a zero-sum game.
It never works.
Yes.
But that's what passes for policy.
Yes. So, you know, the quick way of trying to fix things to boost numbers is devaluing currency, but in the long term, it makes almost everyone worse off. And the people on Main Street, the middle class, is going to hurt them the most. You talked about an intentional devaluation of currencies. I mean, if they're devaluing you 7 to 12% per year, I don't know really anyone who's getting, raises that much every year. So if you're being devalued that much every year with intentional inflation, devaluation of currency, and then taxes being layered on, your lifestyle 5 to 10 years from now, think of decades, is going to be totally destroyed. So, Trump is betting that with a weaker currency, he can bring jobs back. We've talked about this in the past on Welcome to Dystopia episodes with our automation, that, there's going to be jobs that are brought back, but they're not going to be nearly as many. There's going to be a lot of investment in automation, robotics. So, yeah, there'll be factory jobs invested, but a lot of them are going to be not humans. They're going to be, 1 or 2 humans either repairing or operating, heavy machinery or robots or automation, rather than, hundreds or thousands of factory workers.
And it cannot be stressed enough how unusual it is to have a U.S. president say that they want a weaker dollar. That's never happened, ever. So that's in part why that very article that hit Wall Street Journal, I think it was back in February, if memory serves, where that formal policy was actually made public, and then it flipped around sentiment in precious metals and gave the dollar quite the scare. It's pretty significant that this is part of the core of Trump's economic policy.
Well, just because other past presidents, Eric, didn't say they want a weak currency doesn't mean in their behavior they didn't. Because look what FDR did in 1930. FDR lied.
Oh, no, that's different. No, yeah, FDR, I stand corrected. I mean, what FDR did, that's completely different. I mean, he completely reset the currency and devalued by 2/3. So, yeah. But subsequent to that, and certainly within the post-Bretton Woods and closer, the dollar window where we removed the gold link on an international stage, in the modern era, it's always been the BS policy line from presidents and Treasury secretaries that we want a strong dollar policy. The United States is, even Trump was saying this earlier in his campaign.
Yeah, it was
and
rhetoric.
In the early portion of his presidency, it's like a knee-jerk propaganda ritual to, in fact, state that as our formal policy, regardless of whether or not we were simultaneously working behind the scenes to lower the dollar. And we have done that periodically. But it is significant that they've given up the illusion. That's how serious they are about wanting a lower dollar.
Yeah, and it'll be very interesting to see how Trump gets his programs funded. I think he's going to, because the finances of government are so tight, the Congressional Budget Office may force him to put on VAT taxes and other things. But yeah, you brought up an interesting point, Eric, about Trump's rhetoric. It already seems like he's doing a 180 on a lot of the rhetoric he did just to get elected. So, he was anti-Federal Reserve rhetoric. the Federal Reserve's causing a bubble, asset prices are inflated, interest rates are manipulated, and now it seems he's already kind of, backtracking and doing a 180 on that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's making nice noises even to Janet Yellen because he wants interest rates to be favorable for his policies.
And you brought up how there's basically been coordinated devaluations. Ben Bernanke, he had a theory. I'm not sure if he did this as an academic paper or while he was already at the Federal Reserve, but he was theorizing that if countries take turns devaluing or everyone devalues at once, then no one can get into a currency war. So this was a large academic paper that Ben Bernanke put out at some point, and it seems that a lot of these central banks and treasury departments, whether it's the U.S., Japan, the ECB, Bank of England, are basically on board with this, and they're experimenting right now. What they've done, though, I think, is they're hurting their savers. They're hurting their retirees with these policies, and then they're putting a lot of inflation and stagflation, misallocation of capital into the global supply chain, which is, hurting almost everyone's standard of living, unless, Eric, you have the ability to gamble on asset prices going higher.
Yeah, and, even before we started Welcome to Dystopia, and we were just doing occasional interviews, years ago, you and I talked about how the central banks in their interest rate policies as well as the quantitative easing programs, they rotated their introduction. And that is precisely done so as to not have massive impacts on currencies. They tried to rotate in round-robin fashion, action from the Fed first, then Bank of England stepping in and doing things, and then the ECB. Those programs were all introduced with some degree of dovetailing over each other, yes, but there also was a certain amount of coordination in the way those things were rolled out because they did have an eye on how to make the ramifications of all of this money liquidity dumping into one currency zone versus another have lesser impacts on the FX markets, the currency markets.
Yeah, and
they wanted the value, go down, purchasing power relatively constant, so that people can't see the decline in their standard of living as the bankers save the banking system.
Yeah, and there is inflation, obviously, in the real economy in Main Street. There's a lot of inflation in rent and food prices. Ed Batowski of the Chapwood Inflation Index says inflation in a lot of major cities in the U.S. is well above 10% per year for the last 5 years. But the majority of the monetary inflation that has been created, the majority of credit creation that has been created has not hit the real economy. The majority of it has gone, since 2008, has gone into asset prices, which, if you're a banker and you get a big bonus, then you spend money into the economy. You're buying Lamborghinis, you're buying your wife or your mistress, either like a new condo or new clothes, new wardrobe every month or something like that. But the majority of people in the real economy aren't seeing that money, though.
That's right. And in fact, the Federal Reserve and the United States Treasury and our compatriots and allies in similar offices and other major countries had their outright goal of saving assets, to elevate assets so as to save the banking system and create conditions where it would prevent the Great Depression, and then in turn hope that would in fact increase lending and economic activity thereafter, and the second never happened.
Well,
or at least, it was counteracted and completely neutralized.
I think there was a bunch of reasons for the wealth effect to save asset prices besides just saving the banking sector. The other one was to keep the tax revenues coming in. So if there's a bunch of people trading asset prices back and forth, stock trading, currency trading, bond trading, that's a lot of extra tax revenue the government makes from the ultra wealthy in capital gains taxes on trading pieces of paper, assets back and forth. So
very true.
Yeah. So I think
you know as well as I, the biggest fear, though, was that we were going to have a nuclear implosion in the entire financial system of the Western economies. And we did come very damn close. We came very close to the entire money market systems shutting down and blowing up in 2008.
Well, we probably should have. That would have been the cure. People who committed fraud should have went to jail, and we might have had a real recovery then in the economy. People, the central bankers, the Keynesians, the politicians act like falling prices, deflation is bad. If you're a customer and you want to go get something at the mall or buy something online, you want to sell, you want lower prices. So, they're panicking for lower prices. This is ridiculous. The market's clear, market's reset. deflation is a healthy thing. And the other thing is, free markets and capitalism over the long term with competition, normally this is good for the consumer and they produce lower prices at a higher quality. So, you can't really fight deflation for forever, because eventually, Eric, if there's competition allowed in an industry, obviously with healthcare, there's so much government intervention. This is preventing in a lot of, whether they're drugs or actual medical care from a doctor or specialist, they're not allowing prices to fall. But in a lot of other industries where there's healthy competition, you get more for less. And there is deflation. And you cannot fight deflation in the market. It's like fighting Mother Nature.
Yeah, the interesting thing, and this is kind of a tangent, and we can look at these subjects from an academic and informed Austrian School of Economics perspective and understand what are, in fact, the conditions and rhythms of an economy and sound policy that would, in fact, have a rational world. We know what that looks like. We know what system and what it would embody that would actually work would look like. Trouble is that our system is so screwed up right now that to transition in any way, shape, or form is like, it's really, really difficult to imagine how that in reality can come without a complete and total crash. So
yes.
It's pretty ugly.
Yeah.
This is a subject that we should probably do a show on, in a theme show about how does one actually let financial markets regularize themselves, return to something normal. How do you get there? I mean, that's a heck of a set of challenges that are going to involve almost, if we were to try to see and imagine a perfect world where policymakers would try to execute reforms that would, over a 10-year period, bring us to something normal, I don't know even how that could possibly work. I think it's almost a fair statement to say that a crash is inevitable, and that's the only time we're going to see some kind of serious effort to readdress what's going on, because all solutions, so-called solutions, quote-unquote, that policymakers try to execute are either wrong and ill-advised or impossible and only meant to deal with things on around the edges, incrementalism, like, stupid efforts to reform Obamacare that ultimately mean nothing, things like that.
I don't think it could work without a monetary reset of some sort. Because the problem is money itself, and there's so many other things that have just been screwed up based on the money. Yep. There's a sickness in morality, though, that's based on our culture, and a lot of it's because the money system is so screwed up, and then government's gotten so big it's taking over everyone's lives. I want to just briefly touch on this article.
Well, before we tear off on that, I totally agree with you. I think we are going to see a monetary reset, and it's going to come in 2018 or 2019. This system is going to crash.
Yeah, I mean, the exact timing, definitely, I would say the probability of another financial crisis in the next 2 or 3 years is extremely high. If you ask me to narrow it down to 2 months from now or 18 months from now, it's very difficult to say. But I'm pretty confident 2 or 3 years from now, because there's so many landmines that could potentially go off. And it's becoming very difficult for them to keep all the plates spinning. Hedge fund manager, Austrian School hedge fund manager Kevin Duffy, who I had on a couple weeks ago, he has a good article on Lou Rockwell about this, asking if libertarians and Austrian School people are too bearish, talking about how technology has offset a lot of problems with inflation and government intervention. So I'll put a link to that. I think it's a very good article for people because libertarians and Austrian School people get accused of a lot of being too negative and too bearish, and Chicken Little, always the sky's falling. But Eric, I want to transition now to.
Well, hold on. I'm not going to leave that. Okay, I think I consider that a false argument on the part of his thesis, because Austrian School of Economics thinkers have no problem with the innovation cycle. I mean, Schumpeter and creative destruction is part of the Austrian family, and technology boosts the business cycle and enhances creativity. So this is a false contradiction that he's introducing, and there is no issue there. And I'm not even sure I'd really agree with his argument. I mean, yes, it is fair to say that Austrians tend to be more dour about our economic prospects, for sure, because we have a different way of looking at the nature of the business cycle and the nature of credit creation and how distortions happen in the economy. And it's just been a case of a real, it takes a lot of time for a large battleship to turn 180 degrees, and that's what we have here, a gigantic system that is in the process of evolving after having created way too much credit. And technology is a wonderful thing. Anybody that makes the argument that Austrian school of economics thinkers are too pessimistic because they don't appreciate how technology is going to save our bacon because it's going to create a greater economic surplus that fixes the problems of having way too much debt, sorry, those arguments are vacuous. I have not read the article, so perhaps I'm being too anal, but enough said.
It's an interesting article. I'm not sure I agree with everything in it, but it's a very interesting article because it says, technology should have lowered the prices of everything, but government intervention has offset, with inflation, a lot of the deflation and beneficial cost lowering that, processing power with Moore's Law and other things have done. So that's
all true, okay? But to try to extend the argument and to say that, Austrians are not confident enough in our system's ability to right itself because we don't appreciate the technology sufficiently. I'm sorry.
I'll put a link to the article in the information section so our listeners can read it for themselves and decide. But I want to now talk about Trump's foreign policy, since that's the big news story pretty much everyone has been talking about since it happened. What's your opinion on the Syria strikes? Do you think then that Trump is he a neocon? I did a short video on this. Do you think he's a warmongering neocon now? Do you think he was tricked or duped into this by the CIA or deep state? What's your opinion on the Syria strikes, Eric?
Well, Trump's not a neocon. He has got leanings that are organic and real when it comes to him being interested as an economic nationalist, and the way he defines the best interest for America and the American empire is not as aggressive as the way the neocon faction of the foreign policy establishment define what is best for America. But Trump is interested in having his foreign policy aligned with a lot of goals that the neocons agree with, and he also is very deep in the camp of people who are in favor of what Israel's foreign policy outlook is for the region. Trump is very much interested in having Iran overthrown. He has a related perspective. He's always on a campaign trail talked about how he did not want to have troops on the ground and an expansion of the war in Syria, but that doesn't mean to say that he wasn't interested in the same kind of policies of reining in Assad or ring fencing him, so to speak. So here we have Trump probably receiving intelligence that was exaggerating what had happened, and my best guess, my best assessment of how this all went down with the Syria strike was that Trump received intelligence and the message from his advisors that Assad had dropped these chemical munitions, and that Trump could make this attack something that would help him from a domestic politics point of view, and it has. And so he went for it. The area that was bombed, or the area in which this incident happened, it's not even clear that there were munitions dropped from airplanes. But the area in question is 100% controlled by Al-Qaeda forces. They have renamed their group twice. I don't remember their current name, but they were the Al-Nusra Front, the Jabal al-Nusra Front. These are terrorists that have direct lineage to Al-Qaeda in Iraq. This is not conspiracy theory on my part. These terrorists are openly talked about by United States senators, and we have photographs of John McCain meeting with the leaders of these people, and they were our proxy force. We also are linked to ISIS, believe it or not. But, I'm drawing out a lot of history here because it's important to explain this context. And without the context, it's impossible to know the basic fact that Assad did not do this. The Syrian regime did not gas its own people. This area is 100% controlled by Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda in 2013 was busted by the United Nations as being manufacturing kitchen-grade sarin and other chemical weapons. The event itself most likely was a warehouse where there were chlorine gas or some other kind of phosphorus or agricultural chemicals that got dispersed and killed a lot of people. And military and intelligence sources that communicate with people like ex-CIA Philip Giraldi, who has done a number of really important articles revealing what those sources on the ground have told him, present a case that actually draws into question the rationality of the necessity of asking our leaders to present some real evidence. We never get real evidence justifying the actions that our military does. It's always a rush to judgment. So we had this bombing of Syria, 59 cruise missiles delivered when Trump and President Xi of China are eating their chocolate cake. And Trump gets to recoup a lot of his political capital. He even has John McCain and Lindsey Graham patting him on the back. And Hillary Clinton, of all people. My God. This is a wag the dog moment for Trump, and it's incredibly dangerous. It was also tied to trying to send a message to the Chinese that, look, we want North Korea to stop their nuclear program. We don't want to do a military strike against them, but we're putting on this fireworks show for you while you're eating your cake, President Xi, just to make it clear to you that we're serious and we're going to send in more naval resources into the region, and that's what they've done. China immediately responded by moving 150,000 Chinese troops to the area of the North Korean border so as to make sure that if the United States did strike and there was a chain reaction of destabilization within North Korea, that China wouldn't be facing a horde of 5 million North Koreans running into the Chinese territory. This is some serious stuff. I mean, what's going on could escalate pretty bad. I take some solace in the significance of 150,000 troops being moved. That's no pansy act. I mean, it takes serious effort to move 150,000 people. China's taking it seriously, and hopefully that's an indication that we can, hope for the best, that maybe there might be some diplomatic pressure of some sort that China can use, because they do have leverage, to make North Korea come up with some kind of bargain where they get like some economic buyout in exchange for inspections and closing their nuclear program and all that. That's where I think our policy establishment in the United States is thinking. The fleet is sailing over there, and we're pounding our chest, and this is a display of willingness to use force, and they're hoping that some kind of negotiated settlement happens. But the trouble is that when you send your fleet out and you pound your chest and you make demands, and if nothing happens from China's arbitration somehow, some way through diplomatic channels to finesse something, then what? Then what?
Well, I think Trump is
what's so scary.
Eric, I think Trump is surrounded by too many neocons. He made the mistake of taking in too many people close to George W. Bush and people with too many ties to David Petraeus. H.R. McMaster, who got...
Even his daughter's husband is a jackass.
Yeah, Jared Kushner? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he owes a lot of money to Chinese investors. Yeah, over $1 billion in debt on his 666 property in New York City. So... on Central Park, either Central Park or Fifth Avenue.
And the boot drop kicking of Michael T. Flynn and the ring fencing of Steve Bannon. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's this craziness going on.
Well, yeah.
So he is being completely surrounded by neocon interests who are jacking him around. And Trump, unfortunately, as I've watched how Trump has stepped into his shoes of president and how he's been able to respond to intelligence that's being fed to him, it's very clear that the guy's completely over his head.
Yeah, he's got way too many Goldman Sachs people and way too many neocons surrounding him right now. From what I've heard, a lot of that has to do with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who he takes a lot of advice from, and the elite connections that Ivanka Trump and Kushner have. They're being wined and dined by the rich technology Democrats and other, billionaires on Wall Street that Kushner is close to. So,
yeah, and a bigger-than-life personality and ego sometimes works really well in business. I mean, you can kick some serious butt in business as an entrepreneur if you're arrogant as hell and you're a type A personality, and where diplomacy and management of a finesse job is not as complicated as being somebody who has to manage the finesse required to be the president of the United States and all the various interests and everybody wanting to kill you, amongst your enemies politically and on and on. I think Trump is so out of his depth that it's scary. I had higher hopes for him that he would rise to the occasion, and quite frankly, I think his ego and hubris are going to be his downfall, and the guy's kind of a doofus because of it.
Well, Eric, I think he should be firing people like Comey and a bunch of others left and right. He's giving too many people a chance that were involved in corruption and screw-ups and other past scandals. So I think,
that he doesn't suggest that he's not as intelligent as even, people who like him think he is.
Yeah, or he's too soft on them, trying to give them a second chance or something. Because I've heard him, give excuses for Comey. Oh, he's a nice guy. Before on Comey, when Comey's past is filled with potential corruption areas. Do you think he's losing his base, the people that voted for him? Do you think Trump is losing those people? Because
Yes, I mean it's not 100%. Obviously, some people will react by getting closer to him. But a major percentage of people who were supportive of Trump, certainly look at him differently now.
Yeah, and
a huge percentage.
I have major respect for Trump supporters who are holding his feet to the fire now and saying, well, I like this, but I don't like this. I have respect for people like that. I don't have respect for the blind Trump followers who, think he still walks on water. Because, he's clearly making some mistakes here. His domestic policies, Eric, are being sabotaged and leaked to death and slowed down because he needs Congress to help him get a lot of this stuff passed. The bureaucracy is, destroying his ability to get a lot of these things passed. But, the neocons and the Democrats, apparently they can agree on foreign policy that it's okay to go and bomb another country.
It's always okay to bomb another country. I mean, geez. The wag the dog phenomenon is a bipartisan kumbaya fest, and whenever we have domestic trouble in the United States, it's always very easy for a president to just have a splendid little war.
Yeah, but Trump's domestic policies are having a real hard time getting moved through. There's a lot. The swamp is winning in that regard. They're delaying and sabotaging and leaking out a lot of that stuff. And the Trump supporters who compared him to Dr. Ron Paul, come on, guys. I heard that way too many times when he was, winning, when he was moving up in the polls, when he had won the election and the inauguration, that President Trump's gonna be like what Ron Paul should have. I never believed that, but some people actually did. It's totally ridiculous.
Well, thankfully I didn't see that often. That would have made me mad.
Well, Dr. Ron Paul did we'll talk about this at the end of the show, where we got a few more things to go before Scumbag nominees, but Dr. Ron Paul did a great Mythbusters on Friday about the income tax. So we got 3,500 approximately retail stores closing in just the next few months, and yet, the government says how good the economy is going. It can't all be because Amazon, everyone's buying online and going to Amazon.com.
Yeah, well, even formal economic statistics are now showing that we are on the verge of a recession the normal, conventional take is, 2 quarters down, and economic stats are starting to show that. In the New York Empire Fed numbers around, they're turning over. This is most recent, but even forecasts like the Atlanta GDP model, everywhere you look, there are signs that the conventional numbers, never mind real numbers, are showing that we're rolling over.
Yep. And the other stories before the scumbag nominee section, China and the Central Bank of Russia is opening up a branch in Beijing to make it easier for them to do bilateral trade deals outside of the U.S. dollar. That was the April 2nd zero hedge story. So, probably the gold community, Eric, is going to run with this too much. They're going to blow this out of proportion. It's only one office. They're not announcing how large the trade deal is. I'm sure someone in the gold community is going to say, this means the dollar's collapsing immediately.
Yeah. Well, this story actually is a story that's been under development and evolving for 18 months. And we have, in fact, seen the gold community do just that periodically and all the various things that are linked to it. The opening of this office in Beijing has been in the works for a year, and it's part of the integration of greater trade with the entire Eurasian region, but with China and Russia leading it. So they'll do a lot more bilateral trade directly with each other. They'll have coordination between their central banks in terms of how much yuan circulates in Russia and how much Russian ruble-based trade circulates in China, and the cross trades for that. They'll even integrate how credit moves and impacts each nation's central bank policy. It's a pretty big step, and in time, they also are doing things when it comes to coordinating Chinese importation of gold produced in Russia and in the region as well. They're trying to set up a regional coordination amongst the other STANs nations like Kazakhstan. I mean, they produce a decent amount of gold. They consume a lot of gold too. Kazakhstan's central bank was, for a good chunk of time, couple months, the number 3 importer of gold in terms of reserves that they were stashing away. So all of this is leading to a greater liquidity of the financial markets, and in particular the credit markets between the two countries and then the whole region. They're trying to basically elevate the financial markets of Asia, China and Russia, to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and in congruence with Western markets.
Yeah, and the Zero Hedge article talked about how in the statement that was released that this would make it easier to import Russian gold into mainland China. So,
right.
There's some logistical problems with that. It's not super, especially because I think I listened to a Jim Rickards podcast from the Physical Gold Fund, and you're not allowed to hire private security guards in mainland China to carry guns to guard a armored truck. So in order to move large gold shipments into mainland China, you have to have the military and the Chinese government involved doing it. So it's complicated.
It's fascinating. And, it's also worth pointing out, despite Bernanke saying gold is just kept on central banks because of tradition and all that, obviously the reason why central banks still care about gold, the reason why the United States still has gold, is because there is a historic norm for people to perceive currencies being backstopped ultimately by gold. And what China and Russia are doing to coordinate their gold trade is to try to make their financial markets, their credit markets in particular, and their currencies as well in the eyes of the world based on the amount of trade that will be transacted between these two nations and the region. They're trying to give the perception that their currencies have a robust store of value based on the economic activity that goes on in this region, and they're trying to buttress themselves against the West and the economic system. So you have settlement clearance outside of the SWIFT banking clearance system, and that's centered in Belgium and is the entire worldwide transaction system clearance system that grew up under the petrodollar standard. Or under the dollar standard, even before the petrodollar. This is the big picture geopolitical, geofinancial implications of what China and Russia are doing. They have been forced by the West out, in the case of Russia, outright blocked by the West. I mean, they were literally sanctions put against them and so forth. They were forced to actually create these parallel kind of transaction clearing systems and in their effort to make their markets more robust and more liquid and develop further, this is all leading towards their improving both markets and their currencies, and ultimately even giving them the opportunity, if they so choose, to back their currency outright with gold. They'll probably start with something that focuses on the backing of gold or bonds that are backed with the right for the bond purchaser to, demand gold in payment of the principal of the bond, gold-backed bonds. That's probably what we're going to see in 2, maybe 3 years. And this infrastructure being put in place are stepping stones along the path to having the Chinese and Russians, elevate their stature and their ability to survive outside of the economic systems of the West.
Yeah, China is also setting up the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, with economic trade zones, and also, improved infrastructure along those lines. And then they're setting up over 30 currency swap trade deals with trading partners, whether it's Egypt or Venezuela, where they have the trading partners have access to billions of a few billion here, a few billion there in extra funds. But normally the countries like Venezuela are going to have to give China some type of deal on oil or some other types of commodities.
They're not only setting it up; it's already up and running.
Yeah.
It's a done deal, and they're going to grow.
Well, those currency swaps are tiny, though, compared to the ones that the Federal Reserve is putting out. So, yeah, they have a lot of room to get there to the point where China's going to compete with
No, actually, they're quite substantial. I mean, they did deals with Russia to the tune of $500 billion.
I wasn't aware of that one specifically, but some of the other currency swap deals I've looked at are much smaller. So they're 10 billion, 20 billion or less.
Yeah, right. But the point is that the mechanics are there. The pipes are there. They've already established the relationships, and that's the first stage, and monies have already flown. And so it's a done deal. They can continue to build out this system, and they will. And the volume of commerce now that China transacts outside of the U.S. dollar zone is pretty substantial.
And if the Chinese are going to devalue their currency, their own citizens are going to continue to buy Bitcoin and physical gold and silver instead of letting their government screw them over.
That's right. Yep.
Well, we got 2 more stories before scumbag nominees. So Uber, like many other large technology companies, released their public earnings, and they lost billions. Surprise. Enormous losses from Uber. So, Lyft, who's backed by Peter Thiel and other Silicon Valley investors, is giving them a lot of competition. There was that video of the former CEO of Uber screaming at another Uber driver, telling him not to have risked $100,000 in debt. But Uber had to lower their prices, or Lyft probably would have put them out of business. So, Uber is like one of these technology companies, Eric, that just has grown the revenues, and, they've suckered more investors onto it. But I'm glad that they've, for consumers, that they've lowered the prices, because the taxi monopolies in a lot of major cities was just horrible, the prices for taxis. So at least now you can get an affordable taxi cab ride in a city like New York City or DC, although there's surge pricing, but you also have the option to, I think there's carpool software now for that stuff too. But, compared to the old prices, I would say Uber has definitely given the consumer a lot more choice and a chance at lower prices. But then the other technology companies like Snapchat and stuff may never be profitable. So I'm not surprised that Uber, released their financials and that they're hemorrhaging money this much. The other one is the French election coming up, Eric. Before we start recording, called a potential black swan. Marine Le Pen looks like she's gonna get to the final 2. You said that there's out of all the candidates, they advance to the next round, and then 2 candidates have a runoff. Is that how the French elections work?
Yeah, and the polling clearly shows that Le Pen and Macron are going to make it to the second round. And what will be interesting is whether or not the majority of votes from the other candidates move to Le Pen. And I think that there's actually a pretty decent chance that, because the contrast between the politics of Macron and Le Pen are stark enough, and because we will no longer be, seeing a generalized election, it'll just be the runoff with the 2 candidates, there's a significant and far underappreciated probability that Le Pen may win. And the, establishment and the mainstream media coming out of France and world media reporting about France, all are trying to make the argument that the argument I just made is not going to happen. I think there's a significant possibility that Le Pen will manage an upset because of the number of votes that she'll peel away from people who are supporting other candidates. We saw something like that happen in the United States in the primaries, and when Sanders went down, a surprising percentage of the people who supported Bernie Sanders ended up voting for Donald Trump.
Yeah, or they didn't vote at all, which also benefited Donald Trump, or they voted for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson, which also benefited Donald Trump more than Hillary Clinton, because Hillary was relying on those votes, on those Bernie Sanders people to move over to her. And that's one of the reasons, why she bribed Bernie with over $5 million so he can go buy, a couple extra houses and other perks. And it didn't work out.
So first round's on April 23rd, and Le Pen's going to win, or rather be among the two finalists, and then we're going to have the second round later. I forget I think it's like 7 days later. Memory does not serve, but suffice it to say, it's going to be interesting to watch this and see how the media frames what goes on. In Brexit, we had polling that was obnoxious and completely ridiculous, and skewed in large part because the mainstream media kept on focusing on what the betting parlors in London were doing, and the fact that that kind of data is shaped by the pound value of the bets themselves, and the fact that bankers going down and making bets, expressing their desire for Brexit to go down in flames, were putting a lot more money on the table when they were expressing their bets. So the mainstream media ran with that thing. The betting parlors in London say there's 54% chance Brexit's going to die.
I heard there were rumors, Eric, from banks with London offices that told their employees that if they voted for Brexit, that they would be fired if they were caught. So
those rumors are going around, and also it was just kind of reporting a rumor based on fact, because the reality is that the leaving of the European Union with Brexit will in fact reduce the City of London financial jobs, because it make more sense for some of these banks to have their employees in Frankfurt, for example, or Scotland somewhere, Edinburgh. So there's legs to that rumor. It was very easy for the rumor to go around because it's a reality.
Well, we are seeing a rise in, economic nationalism and nationalism increasing across the board. In Europe, Western Europe does have immigration problems now, that the taxpayers in those countries, not only is it hurting their own culture, but the middle class taxpayer in those countries, they can't afford an unlimited amount of immigrants to keep coming in, and for those immigrants to not, pay taxes and get jobs, and it's hurting their culture. So there's a lot of videos about this, people boots on the ground in Europe, about the problems there. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this, but I've heard in France now that there's a lot of homeless people and squatters, in Paris, who are not French, and a lot of the people who have lived in France their whole life are very angry at this and how it's distorting their culture.
Yeah, and the way this debate is always framed in the mainstream media across the board, whether it's in France, United States, what have you, in the West, it's always the same. It's that if you draw any spotlight to these issues, you're a racist or you're a xenophobe for thinking that immigration needs to come in some kind of measured way. I mean, that it's normal for people to care about a congruence of their culture being preserved, and it's also possible, theoretically, to have some kind of open society where you are open to immigration. But clearly, what's going on now is insane. I mean, in the last couple of years, we've seen a refugee flow to the tune of millions of refugees flowing into Europe. I mean, I would ask any liberal who would have a knee-jerk reaction to that, to the ever beneficial orientation of always being open to immigrants and say, hey, wait a minute, you do change cultures when you have that many people on the move.
Well, this is what scumbag of the year George Soros wanted, right? So I mean, like, this was
Yeah.
his plan: his open society, destroy, sabotage governments, destroy the culture of countries. He's a globalist and he likes chaos, so he wants to divide and conquer everyone. He wants people fighting with each other over age, race, sex, race. All the ones he wants people fighting over each other, so elites like Soros then can use the governments and the central banks to steal more and more from us, plunder us, and we hardly even notice.
Yeah. Welcome to Dystopia.
Exactly. So now that brings us to our scumbag nominee section. So I want to nominate Susan Rice and Obama for their spying scandal. It's really unprecedented, the amount of they're saying, all those excuses that we heard, whether it was Comey under oath saying, oh, it wasn't advertently that we did it, but she signed off on the logs. We know that Obama has used the IRS to target, libertarian and conservative groups as well. And, it was just totally laughable for Obama to say right before he left office how scandal-free his 8 years were. I mean, there's been so many scandals, whether it's with Eric Holder or with Loretta Lynch or so many other people in the Obama administration. I mean, the new scandal coming out now, Eric, that I hardly hear anyone talking about is how there was many billions of dollars in large corporation fines, and people inside the Department of Justice were funneling money to left-wing activist groups that, George Soros and David Brock and all these guys supported. And as far as they know right now, this story came out about a month ago. They've traced about $3 billion that had been funneled in slush fund money that had been, stolen from corporate fines to the Department of Justice and, illegally sent off to charity groups of Democrats choosing for their agenda. Mm. But this Susan Rice, to use assets to go after specific political enemies, and her history too. Her father was Federal Reserve. She's been a prominent member of the corrupt Brookings Institute, which is this very well-funded globalist think tank here in the D.C. area, and it's really deplorable how any weapon at its disposal the Obama administration used to try to help Hillary Clinton win.
Nomination well deserved.
And the second one is well-deserved as well. Mike Pompeo, current CIA director appointed by Trump, he's done a 180 on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I think he's a hypocrite because I don't think Trump would have won, really, the election. It was one of the major things that was talked about in the exit polling was Hillary's credibility as a liar, and the WikiLeaks and the information that came out had a lot to do with that. So, the Trump administration, maybe he doesn't like WikiLeaks anymore or he wants Julian Assange jailed, but it's hypocritical if he does, because I don't think Donald Trump would have won the election and been in office as the president if, Julian Assange hadn't released the DNC leaks. Looks like that was Seth Rich that had been released, or the Podesta emails. Those played a big part in undermining the credibility of Hillary Clinton.
Yep. And Trump sees his. Trump appreciates what the fake news saga was all about, and he appreciates how Hillary's prospects and the Democratic Party too, given all that was revealed about how they sandbagged Sanders and basically manipulated the primary. He knows about all of that kind of stuff, but to make any kind of expectation that he would not be interested in having the CIA cover its own butt and sources and methods and its power and whatnot. Trump ultimately is an authoritarian as well as being anti-globalist, and he likes having strong institutions like the CIA too. So I'm not entirely shocked by the kind of shift that we see, and anybody who is a sitting director of the Central Intelligence Agency is going to be guarding the interests of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he has come out, the director, and basically said that he put WikiLeaks on notice and that they're going to go after WikiLeaks, that they're going to, that they see, he literally made, and I wish I had the quotes in front of me, I don't, maybe I'll be able to find them quickly here. But
I sent you the article in Facebook on a message if you want to pull it up real quick.
Sure, yeah. But he basically made the argument and statements that, we need a little bit less constitutional law and a little bit more recognizing that protecting free speech has the consequences of harming the Central Intelligence Agency and privacy of the Central Intelligence Agency's internal data, and that they're not going to put up with that anymore, and that they're going to attack WikiLeaks.
Well,
that was the subtext of his message, and attack free speech.
Well, free speech has already been limited a lot in the United States. Look at college campuses. There was Lauren Southern and other either former libertarians or pro-Trump people, and they were attacked by Antifa, and the police didn't protect them over the weekend at Berkeley. And, there's a lot of examples of this also on college campuses where basically like libertarian group leaders are being arrested and they're not being given free speech rights. But if you're a if you're a Democrat group, you have free speech. So the people who are saying we still have free speech in America, I mean, it's just not really true. We have some free speech, but the limits on it is increasing. It's really scary though how they want to go after Assange, how he helped Trump so much now. It's to help him get the election. It's really scary.
The stepped up effort by the Central Intelligence Agency is because of the Vault 7 releases and the depth at which those releases dive. I mean, supposedly there's only 2% or whatever of what is in Vault 7's documentation having already been released. So they're like jumping at the pit, wondering what the heck's going to come around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't been following WikiLeaks' Twitter feed for the last couple weeks, so I'd only saw it was 1% that was released up until a couple weeks ago, so I don't know if they had dumped more.
No, they haven't done more, and I was just, overestimating. But, I don't think they literally, counted every character of every email and, said 1% is out. They said, a quote-unquote, about 1% has been released. That's what WikiLeaks said.
Yeah, so it's really scary now. This brings me back to the this dystopian quote that Benjamin Franklin had predicted about the future. He was like, when people choose security over freedom, they end up with neither. So
yeah.
So the government is trying to issue people, oh well, all you have to do is sacrifice a little bit of your freedom. You'll have more security. In the long run, you'll be fine. And when you add up all these choices, Eric. All these choices, at small little increments, they compound over time. I was talking about this in my SGT report interview where, how for 100 years now, there's been big government, progressive government, regulatory state. We had in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created. There was an attempt at global government then with Woodrow Wilson with the League of Nations. He created the permanent income tax. He put in a lot of government bureaucracy agencies as well. Him and Teddy Roosevelt did. And then, it started to accelerate even more when FDR came in. Over time, these things compound. And that's what gets us to the point we are at now. So when these things were initially put in, they may have not affected that many people. They may have affected a small group of people in their lives and not too much in their lives. But now we're at the point where, over decades and decades and decades, the government has changed the rules more and more. Look at the case of the income tax. Ron Paul, since the income tax is coming up tomorrow, Ron Paul did a great Mythbuster show on the income tax and the history of it. But the lawyers have changed the rules on what is income over the years. So, I mean, it's incredibly immoral. And this is what it's not just the IRS, it's many government agencies have done this. So they're making our lives harder and harder. It's tougher and tougher to have a decent living and survive and have savings and start a family. And, that's what gets us to a dystopian society is it doesn't happen really overnight. It's really taken, I would say, about 100 years of compounding of all these rules and laws and regulation and taxes and inflation to get to the point we are at now where, Eric, we'll be lucky if we make it another 2 or 3 years.
Certainly from a financial market crash point of view, I think we got a very interesting next couple of years ahead of us.
Exactly. So I'm going to wish everyone a happy tax day if you're an American for April 18th. Not. But seriously, though, pay your taxes and just figure out ways to write off on expenses. So learn how to itemize deductions. Or hire, if you have the money, hire a good tax accountant or tax attorney to help you pay the least amount of taxes legally possible. I'm not going to pull an Erwin Schiff, and I do respect Erwin Schiff, but writing a book on how to not pay taxes and going on a book tour in the United States probably wasn't the smartest idea when the government's looking for examples of people to imprison. Okay, well, that's it for today's show. Thank you for listening to episode 34 of Welcome to Dystopia, and we'll be back in the next couple weeks with episode number 35. Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.